If you've ever been to China or even eaten at a Chinese restaurant, you know the dragon is huge business. But what makes it so unique that it warrants all of this attention? It turns out the Chinese dragon is much more than meets the eye. In Chinese culture, Chinese dragons are powerful and beneficent emblems with alleged control over aquatic phenomena such as calling rain during a drought. Dragons appear in mythology, festivals, astrology art, names, and idioms throughout China. Everyone knows dragons don't really exist, but a recent odd find in China may change everything. What exactly is this recent finding, and why is everyone so excited about it? In today's video, we explore a bizarre case of dragon bones discovered in China that will shock you. The Chinese term for dragon appears on the very first samples of Chinese writing, which date back roughly 3,500 years. When the Chinese first entered history with the revolutionary development of written records, most writing was ceremonial in character. To mention a few, the king's diviners requested of the oracle whether a hunt would be successful, if an enemy state had laid a curse on the court, or if rain would fall. Depending on the time, the oracular exchange was then written on animal bone, tortoise shells, or metal vessels. These old relics tell us that the dragon did exist in some form, and what it looked like. And why do you need to know this? Well, 1.3 billion Chinese claim to be descendants of the dragon. China is one of the world's oldest living civilizations, dating back around 5,000 years. In that sense, the dragon represents not only China's heritage, but also its astonishing rise to modern triumph. So, in a sense, knowing the dragon means knowing China. Yandi, a legendary tribal leader, was claimed to have been born thousands of years ago as a result of his mother's telepathic encounter with a powerful dragon. They opened the precursor to Chinese civilization with the help of the dragon and in alliance with Huangdi, a famous tribal leader and, according to some accounts, the grandson of the dragon. As a result, Emperors Yandi and Huangdi were the Chinese people's ancestors. Before ascending to heaven, the two emperors are fabled to have been immortalized as dragons. With the passage of time, the Chinese came to refer to themselves as descendants of Yandi and Huangdi, as well as descendants of dragons. Now, just recently, residents of a Chinese town announced that they had found the skeleton of a deceased dragon, and they assert that the peculiar remains are evidence that the legendary beast does in fact exist. The unusual lengthy skeleton is at least 60 feet long, with two incongruous small arms poking out in the center and a head that resembles a cow skull. It was discovered in a field near Zhangjiakou City, Hebei Province, China. Traditional Chinese dragons, unlike dragons depicted in Western mythology, have no wings and fly by swimming through the air, similarly to how snakes slither along the earth. The bizarre skeleton's anatomy convinced some locals that the remains could indeed be those of a dragon. Several witnesses at the scene captured video of scores of villagers encircling the purported dragon remains. The townspeople are unsure what to make of the skeleton, but a few superstitious residents appear to believe they are looking at the bones of the mythological creature. Netizens on Chinese social media speculated that the rib-like skeleton was placed there on purpose, possibly as a prop for a movie, but no one has come forward to substantiate these claims. According to one source, the skeleton resembled a cinematic prop consisting of cow or sheep bones. Although orthodox scientists are unconvinced that the skeleton recovered belonged to a real dragon, the media frenzy around its discovery suggests that many people around the world, not only in China, believe in the existence of dragons. Dragons may be seen throughout history and in various cultures, which is remarkable because some of these creatures never met or had contact with one another. As a result, the persistence of dragon stories and cultures across different folkloric contexts is most likely no coincidence. Dragons are one of the more fantastic creatures to examine in mythology, folklore, and stories, since they are so prevalent in Western culture. In several Bible passages, Satan is described as a dragon. They are considered to be one of the most powerful animal gods in Aboriginal mythology. Dragons appear in Ethiopian imagery, and one of the most remarkable aspects is that images of what a dragon should look like have remained fairly consistent over time. What's truly interesting is that when we consider all of the various elements that may have contributed to the dragon legends, they're all often portrayed as reptilian in nature, with scales and claws and often bat-like membranous wings, a long reptile tail with a strange structure or a spike or stinger on the end, incredibly sharp teeth, the capacity to breathe fire. We must evaluate the likelihood that at least part of these dragon legends are based on some form of extraordinary and possibly unknown species. Is it likely that the countless dragons depicted in legends all around the world were not just mythical but also real? Perhaps the answer can be found by looking into some of the historical accounts in which people claim to have had experiences with real dragons. Encounters with dragons in bygone eras were not regarded myth or tall tales. They were written down and documented as historical truth, and they were told as true stories of encounters with enigmatic blood and flesh animals. St. John of Damascus records an event from the 8th century in which the Roman army is taken aback when a gigantic beast described as a dragon rises up behind them. They fight and eventually slay the creature, skin it, and send the skin back to Rome. People took dragons quite seriously until the early modern age. Worms, Germany, is famous for its dragon warrior. In the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, dragon bones were placed all over the city to prove that dragons existed. Many historical accounts of dragons may suggest that these legendary animals were indeed genuine. But if so, it naturally begs the question of whether huge winged serpents still exist today. Some scholars believe the answer is yes, and they cite several reports of a flying creature known as the Van Meter visitor in the early 20th century as evidence. In the early 1900s, the small town of Van Meter, Iowa, was terrorized by a giant 8-foot bat-like monster with huge leather bat-like wings and a horn on its head that could project a light. On the 5th night, during thunderstorms, it emerged with a smaller version of itself, possibly the female gender or offspring, before descending back into the coal mine and vanishing, never to be seen again. In a similar odd dragon case, people living in central China dug up bones they thought belonged to flying dragons and used them in traditional treatments for decades. It was discovered that the bones came from dinosaurs, and today scientists are the ones excavating the area. Until recently, the relics were marketed in Henan province as dragon bones for approximately 25 cents per pound, according to scientist Dong Jiming. To alleviate dizziness and leg cramps, the calcium-rich bones were occasionally cooked with additional seasonings and offered to youngsters. Other times he claimed they were broken up and formed into a paste that was administered directly to fractures and other injuries. Dong was part of a team that recently uncovered a 60-foot-long plant-eating dinosaur that lived 85 million to 100 million years ago in Henan's Ruyang County. When the townspeople discovered the bones were from dinosaurs, they contributed 440 pounds to Dong and his colleagues for investigation. The peasants had dug up an estimated 1 ton of bones during the previous 2 decades. They thought the dragon bones were from flying dragons, said Dong, a professor at the Chinese Academy of Sciences Institute of Vertebrate Paleontology and Paleoanthropology. In another astonishing find from China last year, scientists unearthed a massive petrified skull that had been hidden in a well for 90 years, and it's forcing them to reconsider human evolution. According to academics, the skull was discovered in 1933 by Chinese laborers building a bridge in Harbin, a northern Chinese city under the Japanese rule. The skull was wrapped and stored in an abandoned well to keep it from falling into Japanese hands. It was only recently that the old guy who originally hid it told his grandson about it just before his death. Chinese researchers have named the astonishingly well-preserved fossil Homo longi, a new human species. The species has been called Dragon Man after the northern Chinese province where the skull was discovered, Heilongjiang, or the Black Dragon River region in English. Scientists hypothesize that the skull belonged to a 50-year-old male in a series of 3 articles published in the scientific journal The Innovation. According to the experts, he would have had a large nose to allow him to breathe freely during intensive exertion and would have been engineered to resist the severe regional winters. One of the most striking features of the Harbin cranium is its huge size, which at 9 inches long and more than 6 inches wide, dwarfs the current human skull. In addition, the skull has a cranial capacity of around 1,420 millimeters, 48 fluid ounces. That falls within the range of normal human cranial capacity. But the skull also has many primitive features that make it a unique link between modern people and Neanderthals. When scientists used a software program to compare the relic to 95 other skulls, they discovered that the Harbin cranium and a few other Chinese skulls appeared to form a new branch that was closer to modern humans than Neanderthals. The Chinese team believes the Harbin cranium is distinct enough to be classified as a new species. Others, however, are not convinced. Professor Chris Stringer, a research leader at the Natural History Museum in London, who also participated in the study, believes the skull is comparable to one discovered in China in 1978. What do you think of these strange discoveries? Do you think dragons exist? Tell us in the comments section.